Hello, my name's Harold Halfdan, and welcome to Archaeological Minecraft. I'm a former archaeologist who enjoys playing Minecraft and thought it'd be fun to combine the two. In today's episode, we're leaning into the 1.20 Trails and Tales update, and I'll be excavating a trail ruin I found on the Archaeo SMP. In my normal videos, I typically pick a type of archaeological or historical structure or specific archaeological site and replicate that in Minecraft while talking about its importance, significance, background, and all its other details. But in today's episode, it'll be a little different. Trail ruins obviously don't have a real-world history for me to talk about, but all the same, I thought it would be fun to excavate, and y'all might enjoy seeing how a former archaeologist playing the game would approach excavating trail ruins, and thought it would be fun while I'm doing so to tell some stories or give you some personal anecdotes while conducting the excavation. At the end, I thought it would be fun to look over the site and see what assumptions or post-excavation thoughts I have about the site. So with that said, let's jump into it. So before we start putting a shovel or trowel, or in Minecraft's case, a brush to the site, just like in real life, there are some pre-excavation steps we must perform. In the real world, this would be doing any research on the site, looking up any past excavations, getting funding for a team, getting a team ready, etc. And in this case, a lot of that doesn't apply for Minecraft, but I'm going to do a little flyover with my elytra and look over the site. Basically, I'm going to do a little bit of an aerial survey, and that is something that an archaeologist might do in real life by using a plane or a drone, or maybe even looking at Google Maps. Okay, from up here, let's assess the situation. So it looks like this site's currently in the middle of a river. There's a deeper part of the river, and between the site and the shore, it's shallower, and then over on the one side, it's shallower in the direction of the small islands, and then deeper on the opposite side. Based on the terrain, I'm going to guess that the site extends towards the shore or the small islands. The site being in the river tells me that the river used to historically be in a different place and changed its course in the past. Maybe sea levels were lower back then, or maybe there was a geologic event or a landslide or earthquake which widened the river or changed its course. Or maybe the climate now is wetter, and so there's more rainfall now than there was in the history of this site, and so thus the river's larger than it used to be, and so a site on the banks of the river now is in the river or under the river. In any case, this poses a bit of a problem excavating in Minecraft, just like it would in real life. In real life, you would excavate using underwater archaeological techniques with scuba gear or a snorkel, but you could also build a barrier wall and pump out the water. That's the option I'm going to do here. Based on the slope of the underwater terrain and my assumptions about the site I just mentioned, I'm going to draw a bit of a perimeter with grass and then use the wood to fill in the walls of the perimeter down to the bottom of the riverbed. I'm specifically using wood because that way I know what blocks I'm placing versus what might be a natural block. I don't want to accidentally plow through my perimeter wall and flood my site. Now, I know from a time investment perspective, filling all this in with sand isn't the most time-efficient way to empty out all this water. In real life, you would hook up pumps and pump out the water, and probably would need to run those continuously throughout the excavation to keep the site from flooding. And a better analogy to that might simply have been to use sponge blocks to absorb the water and thus get rid of it. This would have had the advantage of not having to spend all of this time placing sand, which I had to spend time collecting in the first place, but also could have left the site untouched and undisturbed so I could see the original river bottom more easily instead of it blending in with the sand that I'm placing on top of it. Well, here's the problem. This is a survival world, and I don't have any sponges, but I do have a bunch of sand, so sand will have to do. If in your world you do have sponges, I would advise you use that. I also want to take the time before I start excavating to put up a fence around the perimeter as well. In the real world, an archaeologist may do that to keep animals from wandering onto the site or potentially keep out visitors or other people, but in Minecraft, this also is going to be helpful in keeping out any hostile mobs. The last thing I need is a creeper falling on my head and blowing up the excavation. When I was on an excavation in Ireland, excavating a medieval village halfway up Mount Sleevemore, that was a site that we didn't have any fences. We didn't so much get any curious people beyond the occasional hiker or tourist asking us what we were doing, but there were a lot of sheep wandering around the mountain. Luckily, they weren't very curious and stayed away from us and the excavation. There were also about 4 to 5 sheepdogs on the mountain that looked like border collies that kept all the sheep in line away from us and guarding the flock. I remember they would just sit and watch us all day while excavating, no doubt wondering what in the world we were doing digging in the dirt and in the peat. With all the water gone, the site filled in with sand, and the fence in place, we're almost ready to start excavating. Real quick though, before I start digging in, I guess literally, this might be a good time to briefly talk about site surveys and shovel tests. If you want to hear another archaeologist take on doing site surveys, I recommend you check out Archaeoplay's video once you finish watching mine. They also did an awesome collab stream with Pixel Riff, Joe Duggan from the Spawn Chunks podcast, and a Mojang Dev where they excavated a trail ruin, so you might also want to check that out too. Now, in all reality, I just covered the site with sand, and so doing a site walk and shovel tests are useless. And in this type of site, where you would have had to pump out water, and the ground is super muddy, you probably wouldn't do what I'm about to do because you just couldn't see the ground. But with a site survey, you and a number of people form a line and walk the site back and forth, up and back and up and back, looking for any artifacts or structures on the site, trying to keep your line as best you can, barring any impairments in the environment. How close you would stand together depends on the ground cover and how likely you think it is you'll find artifacts. In my experience, when I was working for a state in the Midwest of the United States, and often we're walking farm fields, we would stand about 10 meters or 5 meters from one another. Sometimes if we knew or expected a site to be present or in an area we expected to find artifacts, we would stand 2 meters from one another, so each person had to watch a smaller area and thus lowering our chances of missing something. When you would spot something, you would stick a little flag in the ground and keep moving on with the survey. Once you were done with that area, which could be hours later, you could look back over the field you walked and see where all the artifacts or potentially the sites were located. To me, that was always the coolest part of doing a site survey. At the end of the day, looking out and seeing the scatter of little sites were always my favorite part. Mostly what we would find when we were working for the state, doing surveys or other CRM or cultural resource management work, were flakes from stone tools where someone stopped to sharpen their stone tools in the past. Where I was working, there wasn't flint like we have in Minecraft, but rather stone tools like scrapers and points, like arrowheads, were made from chert. Where I was, the chert was a white color, which was nice because it stood out easily from the black or dark soil, so it was easy to spot. And to strengthen the chert and make it hold its edge longer, the Native Americans would heat treat the stone. Once heat treated, it would take on a pinkish hue or pink color. So often when you would walk the fields, you would see a small flake, pick it up, and see it was pinkish, meaning it must have been from a man-made tool at some point, which a person in history had stopped to sharpen, and thus left the flake behind on the ground. Perhaps it had stayed there for hundreds or thousands of years until you picked it up, and it meant that you were the very next person to handle that item, potentially, since the tool's owner had sharpened their tool and created that flake. Okay, enough about flakes for now. I want to talk about our site and my thoughts around where I'm putting my different test trenches. I'm outlining each trench with some redstone dust to signify where the test trench is going to go. I'm going to place the largest trench right next to where I see the structure sticking up out of the ground and straddle that structure and make it long and narrow so I can try and figure out the orientation. I'm hoping that this trench will tell me if the site is running more east to west or north to south. I'm also planning on putting a test trench to the west of the structure and then to the north of the structure. I'm hoping that between all of these, it'll really solidify where the orientation is and potentially how large the site is. Additionally, to help figure out the orientation of the site, I'm going to do some shovel tests. So shovel tests are another type of site survey that you can use in areas where you can't see the ground, like when you have to do a survey in grassy pasture, or if the field wasn't plowed so you can't see the dirt and you don't have a good chance to visually spot artifacts on the ground, or even when there was a dusting of snow, we would oftentimes do shovel tests. During a shovel test, it's similar to what I've described with a site walk, where you would go up and back along a line, but instead of everyone being in a long line to conduct the survey, in my experience, the crews worked in a team of 2 to 3, and then that goes up and down the line shoveling small holes, usually about 1/3 of a meter in diameter, or about 12 to 16 inches in diameter. On the crew, I was on at least, how we would do it is one person would normally do the shoveling, and then the other people would bring 2 5-gallon buckets and a screen. They would sit on one of the buckets, and then the screen would go on top of the other bucket. The person shoveling would stick the dirt on top of everyone's screen, and then the others would then sift the soil through the screen looking for artifacts. Your shovel test would go as deep as needed until you hit sterile soil. In other words, until you knew based on the geology or soil layer in your area that you were testing that there wouldn't be any more artifacts. Before you filled back in your shovel test, you would note the depth, the width, and the color of each layer of soil found, as well as the type. So for example, a type of soil could be loam, clay, topsoil, silt, etc. And then you would note any artifacts found in them and put them in little plastic bags and then label them up. Once the notes were all made, you could then dump the soil you sifted into your bucket and refill the hole and tamp it down so that no one breaks their ankle later stepping in your hole. You can see I didn't do that really on my dig site here in Minecraft. Thus, if this were the real world, I would have caused a major safety issue, and so don't do what you're seeing me do here. As you can see, I've continued to time-lapse the excavation while I've been talking, and want to take a moment to take stock based on what I'm seeing. As you can see, my assumptions as to the original site dimensions were not nearly ambitious enough, and I'm going to have to open the sides more on all sides. As you can see, there are buildings and artifacts right up to my trench walls on all the sides around my current dig. Regarding how I'm cataloging and documenting the excavation, normally each person would keep a day book talking about their experiences on site, and each artifact, soil layer, etc. would be cataloged and documented meticulously, but this is a game, and doing paperwork isn't something most people think is fun. So I'm copying a method that another member of the Archaeo SMP server came up with named Black Moonstone, who incidentally is a super talented builder and technical Minecrafter. All these shulkers I'm using to store all this material came from their farm, and they also built the server's XP Guardian farm. I think this method is a brilliant compromise between being able to reconstruct the site and its archaeological placements after the fact, as well as not having to keep a paper log on the side and do all the trench and site notes an archaeologist would normally keep. Here's the methodology. You excavate out the site, as you would see me doing, being careful to not destroy any suspicious gravel or sand, and note you can see me flipping over to a plain iron shovel when I get close to any structures, so I can remove the gravel and dirt more slowly. When you hit a sus block, you extract the artifact using your brush, and then replace the block with glass, and then put the artifact back on the glass using an item frame. Thus, you know exactly the placement of each artifact and what the artifact is. Now, I don't have any idea how much quote-unquote loot-specific logic Mojang has put in the game to determine what types of items come out of the sus blocks, but even if it's totally random, being able to look back at the placement and type of an artifact will let us tell a story at the end, and is so much more immersive than simply having a chest of quote-unquote loot at the end of a trail ruin excavation. Now, you can see as I continue to excavate, I've had to expand my trench over and over again. If I had this to do over again, I would have had my test trenches much further away from the original structure. I had them way too close. And now that I know how large these structures can be, I would place them about 20 to 30 blocks in maybe each direction, or each direction that makes sense, to really see what the extent is before I would try and excavate out like this. I keep having to go back up and then excavate from the top down. Now, of course, I could have just dug into the side. This is a game. It's not like it's going to collapse. But for the purposes of your viewing pleasure and to see the full excavation and replicate like an archaeologist would, I don't want to chisel right into the rock and then have an overhang of dirt over my head that could collapse. Now that we're done with the excavation, I thought it would be fun to go over what the trail ruins mean to me and how I would interpret them. So if you look over the site, you can see that there's a central road that runs right along the center. And I thought it was interesting that there was these little holes here at equidistant. So maybe those were originally some wooden posts, either for signposts, or maybe there were lamps or something like that, lampstands. And then I also thought it was interesting that there was a central trench going through there. I have no idea what that central trench would be for, but it's interesting how consistent that is. So I have no idea if it was a water trough, maybe a sewer line. So just going around the center here, you can see that there's a central sign in the middle. Maybe that corresponded to this. That was maybe a shop. There's no building here, but maybe this was because it's a main thoroughfare, it just collected a lot of artifacts with the streets conjoining. Looks like maybe there was something that went off this direction, but I didn't see anything there. These two buildings right here on either side of this house with the fancy roof are cartographer locations, and this one actually on the side here contained a sign, so maybe that was a cartographer's shop. There's a little pavilion over here. There's obviously the tower that we saw, and then this is another little house that looks a little bit same stylistic like this. The most interesting house to me, or not house but structure to me, was this one right here. Let me fly down there and let's take a look at it a little more closely. So when I first uncovered this was before I uncovered the full structure. Digging down, I could see that there was some coal blocks there, and I thought at first Mojang, or the lore of the site, would indicate that maybe there was a burn layer, like a destruction layer, and that's where the charcoal was from. But after I uncovered the whole of the site and see maybe there's some emeralds here, maybe this was just a furnace where they were, and there's this little brick here. Maybe they were just firing some bricks, and so that's where the coal was from the original furnace. Now you notice throughout the thing, I've had my little helper here. I think once we're all done, I'm going to rename him. I don't know, maybe Little Shovel Bum or something like that. But he was a real big help through the excavation, picking up all the sand and stone or whatever it is I needed. He keeps breaking leads though. Well, that wraps up this video where I excavated a trail ruins on the Archaeo SMP. This was a little different video than what I normally create, both in structure and in editing. So if you wouldn't mind, I would love for you to leave me a comment about what you liked or didn't like about the video. Also, please remember to hit that subscribe button and like the video if you liked it. Thanks, have a great day, bye for now.